Hello and welcome, grief therapist Carolyn here, though this is part of our Hospice Hints series. I'm going to do a brief history of hospice. So the modern hospice movement was started in the 1960s, I think 1968 officially, by Dame Cicely Saunders. It's really important to know this. Dame Cicely Saunders actually started after World War II. She was what they called a lady almoner, which is what social workers really became. That was the beginning of the social work movement in modern times. So she started as a social worker. Then she became a nurse because she said it was really hard for women to become doctors, and then she actually became a doctor, and she started the modern hospice movement. And this is really important because it is an interdisciplinary approach to help with your physical, emotional, spiritual, psychosocial, right? So she started it. These are the origins of how hospice began. And she worked with a lot of people. She also worked with Colin Murray Parks. If you watch my thanatology themes, we're going to talk about him. He was a PhD. He's amazing. He's done a lot of great things, and she partnered with him. So she always made sure that the physical and biological was also met with the psychological. She was always continuing to do that work. So she was doing some great stuff in London. St. Christopher's Hospice was the hospice that she started. And some folks, both Canadians and Americans, came over to see what she was doing. And there were a couple people who took it back to Canada. Palliative care, I think, really started in French Canada. It was based because they said the word hospice, they didn't like it. It was some way that it was translated. So that was in Canada in the 70s. And Florence Wald is the woman who started the first hospice in Connecticut. She was a nurse in 1974. However, the hospice Medicare benefit did not pass in the United States until 1982. So that's when hospice really became available to people because insurance covered it, and then they were really able to put a structure in place around it. I also want to say that it's important that we understand history, right? So the modern hospice movement in the United States has been around since 1982. So I just want to make sure that people understand that, and we respect that a lot of people have been doing this work for a long time. And I have been so lucky that I've been able to be trained and supervised by some of the real grassroots folks who were part of this hospice movement, right? Now, in the 2000s, our whole medical system became much more corporate, right? And I think hospice was kind of the last bastion of this kind of grassroots effort to really become more corporate. COVID was really, really hard on hospice. I mean, it was hard on everybody. I personally had to cope. I was here in Brooklyn with bodies piling up. We had a lot of that, and we were already working in hospice, and people were already dying. And it was we weren't really frontline workers. We were kind of the backline workers, right? So it was pretty tough. So a lot of changes have undergone. Hospice has undergone a lot of changes, not always good, right? And like many other things, a lot of the hospice team they're overworked, too many clients, right, and not enough support. So I do want Hospice Hints to be a place. I'm going to put it on the website. There's a YouTube channel, but there's also the website where people can go, and maybe we can start a dialogue and a conversation about your experience on hospice and what you were hoping for and what you did or didn't get. And I'm going to do another video about the hospice social worker who can be, if they have time, to be a very key piece to really pulling things together and helping people with all of this, okay? So I went on a little bit of a tangent there. The other thing I wanted to add about the history of hospice is that here in New York City, the original visiting nurse service started in New York City, and it's related to the tenements and to Henry Street settlement. And so Florence Wald was the woman in the 70s who started the first hospice in our country. Lilienwald in the 1800s, no relation, started what's now, so Henry Street Settlement and the visiting nurses were actually the kind of the same thing till the 50s, and then they split. And I want to do a whole video on the history, but it's very important because visiting nurses are very much part of hospice, right? And now home care as well. But that's where the nurses came to you, and that's where really this idea of home hospice and helping people stay in their homes started. It's all kind of related. It's so exciting. I just think it's wonderful. And in these other videos, when I talk about these women, they're really inspiring and did really, really beautiful work, which I was really inspired when I was out in Brooklyn, going into brownstones, going into different homes, going into public housing. You're really in it with people, and it was a really beautiful experience. So I'm going to talk more about that. So that's a little bit of the history, a brief history of hospice, starting from the grassroots and where it started, and then today. I know it seems like it's changed a lot. The last thing I'm going to just talk about is, so Dame Cicely Saunders started the modern hospice movement in London. In the 80s, St. Christopher's was having financial problems, and they brought in this woman, and her name is, they called her Dame Commander, where it was her name. I mean, that's her title, and it has something to do with when you get royal, this whole, which we don't have here. However, I just want to say that I tried to institute in my house that I would be called Dame Commander. It didn't go that well. But she earned it. So this woman, she saved St. Christopher's, which is still around today, and still a really great model for the modern hospice movement. Okay, that's a brief history of hospice. Thank you for listening.